In a quiet coastal village, cradled between rolling dunes and the vast expanse of the sea, there lived a sculptor named Kalen. He was unlike the fishermen, merchants and weavers of the town, his work known but rarely understood. Each morning, as the tide withdrew, Kalen would wander the shoreline with his satchel of tools, brushes, wooden moulds and a single well-worn chisel. His eyes scanned the smooth, damp sand left behind by the retreating waves, seeking the perfect canvas. He worked tirelessly through the day, shaping the sand into magnificent sculptures. His creations seemed impossibly lifelike. Towering knights in gleaming armor with swords mid-swing as if frozen in battle. Graceful dancers caught in perfect pirouettes, their flowing garments so finely detailed that the villagers could swear they felt a breeze. Majestic animals, lions, horses, falcons, so real that travelers sometimes mistook them for flesh before realizing their ephemeral nature. The villagers often came to admire Kalen's work in the daylight, their voices hushed in awe. But despite their admiration, they never saw him work. Kalen always arrived before dawn and left at sunset, taking great care to finish his sculptures in solitude. This peculiarity earned him whispers of mystery and loneliness. Villager 1. He's a genius. Villager 2. But why does he keep himself so distant? Why does he let the tide destroy his masterpieces each night? Only Kalen knew the answer. At dusk, the true magic began. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky filled with fiery streaks of orange and red, Kalen would retreat to the shelter of the dunes, hidden from view. There he watched as his creations stirred to life. It started subtly, a twitch of a finger, the swish of a tail, or the faint rustle of a dancer's skirt as if caught in a phantom wind. By the time the stars appeared, his sculptures moved freely, their sandy forms defying gravity. The knights raised their swords and clashed in silent combat. The dancers whirled, their bodies moving with impossible fluidity. Horses galloped in circles, their hooves leaving faint impressions in the damp sand before disappearing into the air. Birds stretched their wings and soared for a time, their grains scattering like glitter in the twilight. Kalen watched with a mix of joy and sorrow. He never approached them, never tried to join in their nightly revels. Though they moved with a semblance of life, they weren't alive in the way people were. They didn't see him, didn't know him, and yet they were his creations. Each one carried a piece of his soul, bound to the shifting tides and fleeting magic of the night. As dawn approached, the spell always broke. The knights crumbled mid-stride, the dancers froze before tumbling into heaps of loose sand, the animals dissolved into formless piles. By the time the sun rose, there was no trace of the beauty that had filled the night. The sea reclaimed the remnants, leaving the beach smooth and untouched once more. This cycle continued for years, as steady and predictable as the tides themselves. Kalen became a fixture of the village, a strange, solitary figure whose talent seemed both a gift and a burden. The villagers loved his work, but pitied his isolation. "Why does he work so hard if it all disappears?" one villager would ask. Another would respond, "Why doesn't he carve stone or wood, something that will last?" But Kalen couldn't explain. His art wasn't meant to last, and he couldn't bear to share the secret of its magic. He suspected that if anyone else witnessed the sculpture's nightly awakening, the enchantment might fade. Still, there were moments of doubt. As the years passed, Kalen began to question the purpose of his work. He poured himself into each creation only to watch it dissolve within hours. He wondered if the villagers were right. Was his art worth anything if it was so transient? The thought gnawed at him, but each morning as the tide pulled back and the sand called to him, he found himself unable to resist. One autumn the tide behaved strangely. Instead of retreating with its usual rhythm, it lingered, and the sand grew rough and gritty. Kalen struggled to shape it, his chisel catching on clumps that refused to smooth. His sculptures became cruder, less refined. At night, the magic faltered. The knights stumbled in their duels, their swords crumbling mid-swing. The dancers moved stiffly, their forms fragmenting as they spun. Kalen felt his heart sink as he watched. The magic, it seemed, was fading. The villagers noticed the change as well. They still admired his work, but whispered that it had lost some of its brilliance. Some said Caelan was growing old, that his hands weren't as steady as they once were. Others believed the beach itself was cursed. Caelan said nothing. He simply worked harder, arriving earlier and staying later, desperate to recapture the fleeting perfection he had once created. As the days grew shorter and winter approached, the storms began. Violent winds and pounding rain lashed the coast, erasing the beach beneath turbulent waves. For weeks, Caelan couldn't work. He paced his small hut, his tools untouched. The villagers thought he might give up entirely, but as soon as the storm subsided, he returned to the shore. What he found was both devastating and inspiring. The beach was unrecognizable. The dunes had been carved into jagged peaks, and the once smooth sand was piled in chaotic drifts. But in this disorder, Caelan saw new possibilities. He began to sculpt again, his movements more fluid and intuitive than ever. He let the roughness of the sand guide him, shaping wilder, more primal figures. The knights became fierce warriors, their armor jagged and battle-worn. The dancers were no longer delicate but powerful, their poses exuding strength. He carved wolves instead of lions, eagles instead of doves. His creations reflected the storm's fury, their forms raw and untamed. When dusk fell, they came to life with a new vigor. The warriors clashed with a ferocity that shook the ground. The wolves howled silently at the moon before racing across the dunes. The eagles soared higher than ever, their wings scattering grains of sand like stardust. Caelan watched, breathless, as the beach transformed into a realm of unbridled energy and movement. As the years passed, the storms returned with greater frequency, reshaping the coast again and again. Caelan adapted, his art evolving with the changing landscape. The villagers stopped questioning his work, accepting it as part of the rhythm of the sea. One evening, as the first frost of winter settled on the dunes, Caelan completed his most ambitious piece yet, a towering figure with wings that spanned the width of the beach. The sculpture was rough, its lines unfinished, but it seemed alive even before dusk. That night, Caelan watched as it rose, its wings unfurling with a grace that took his breath away. The figure stood for a moment, gazing out at the sea before leaping into the air. Its wings beat once, twice, scattering sand in a shimmering cascade. Then it soared into the sky, vanishing into the stars. Caelan stood in silence, his heart full. He knew then that his time as the Sand Sculptor was coming to an end. The magic of the beach no longer needed him. The tide, the wind and the sand would carry it forward, shaping their own wonders long after he was gone. The next morning the villagers found the beach empty. There were no sculptures, no tools, no trace of Caelan. Only the smooth, unbroken shore remained, kissed by the waves. But when night fell, the sand stirred. Figures rose, their forms more vivid than ever, moving to the rhythm of the tides and the whispers of the wind. The magic endured, a living legacy of the Sand Sculptor, forever bound to the ever-changing sea.